For the first time in American history, a former president has been indicted on federal charges. Thanks for joining us for In the News Now. I'm Stephanie Haney. And that former president is Donald Trump, who was previously indicted in the state of New York. Now he's been indicted on federal criminal charges for mishandling classified documents at his Florida estate. Now that that indictment has been unsealed, let's break down what we've learned from the document.
The indictment was just unsealed, charging former President Donald Trump with 37 counts, including the willful retention of national defense information, along with obstruction of justice and various other charges. This stems from a special counsel's investigation from the U.S. Department of Justice that has been ongoing for many months now, related to President Trump's handling of classified records and the retention of those records at his Florida estate known as Mar-a-Lago. This is an unprecedented moment in history. It is the first time the U.S. government has charged a former president with federal crimes. These are very serious federal offenses that allege that the former president held on to classified government documents, including documents that describe nuclear capabilities of other governments, attack plans, potentially of military attacks by other foreign governments, and a number of other classified U.S. secrets. The former president has alleged he's done absolutely nothing wrong, that he had the right to declassify government documents. However, this indictment spells out measures that the former president took, along with a co-conspirator who is charged in this indictment, Walt Nauta, Trump aide who worked at Mar-a-Lago. And basically what prosecutors say here is that Trump directed Nauta at some point to move boxes of records that were held in Mar-a-Lago. The indictment spells out specifically one instance, a conversation between Trump and his lawyers, in which they're discussing receiving a subpoena from the Department of Justice. And Trump says to one of his lawyers that he doesn't want them going through the boxes. He doesn't want the Department of Justice to go through the boxes. And wouldn't it be better if they just said they didn't have any records?
The indictment carries unmistakably grave legal consequences, including the possibility of prison time if he's convicted. But it also has enormous political implications, potentially upending a Republican presidential primary that Trump has been dominating. KCEN reporter Meredith Haas has more on the case.
I'm an innocent man. We will prove that again.
Former President Donald Trump coming out on his social media platform Truth Social, calling the most recent indictment against him a, quote, witch hunt.
And they come after Donald Trump, weaponizing the Justice Department.
As of Thursday, the former president was indicted on 7 counts for mishandling classified documents at his Florida estate. Trump is expected to surrender Tuesday at a federal courthouse in Miami. 2 of those charges include false statements and conspiracy to obstruct. If Trump is convicted, he could face prison time, and his run for the 2024 presidency could be in jeopardy. The list of allegations against the former president are stacking up. Looking all the way back to March is when Trump was criminally charged in New York for falsifying records and bribery of an adult film star, to which he pleads not guilty. Then in May, he was held liable for sexual abuse. It's being looked into what his role was in the January 6th attack, and if he had any part in overturning the 2020 election in Georgia. The most recent indictment marks a moment in history for Trump, making him the first former president in U.S. history to face criminal charges by the federal government that he once oversaw.
It was Trump who first announced the indictment in a post online, and then within minutes, Trump, who said he'll be in court on Tuesday afternoon in Miami, used the news to start fundraising for his presidential campaign. He declared his innocence in a video and repeated his familiar refrain that the investigation is a, quote, witch hunt. Associated Press law enforcement editor Mike Balsamo has more on this historic indictment.
This investigation involves the Justice Department special counsel, Jack Smith, who has been conducting this investigation with a grand jury here at the federal courthouse in Miami. A second grand jury had been meeting at the federal court in Washington, D.C., hearing from multiple witnesses. The former president says he's expected to appear here in federal court in Miami on Tuesday afternoon. A person familiar with the matter told the AP that the indictment against Trump includes 7 counts, and 2 people familiar with the matter told the AP that Trump's legal team was informed shortly before he publicly announced his own indictment on his own social media platform, Truth Social.
It's election interference at the highest level. There's never been anything like what's happened. I'm an innocent man. I'm an innocent person. We can't let this continue to go on because it's ripping our country to shreds. We have such big problems, and this shouldn't be one of them. It's a hoax. The whole thing is a hoax.
Now, over the last several months, we've seen a variety of legal challenges confronting former President Donald Trump. This case may be the most serious, dealing with the classified documents investigation at Mar-a-Lago. Eric Tucker with the Associated Press explains how we got here.
January 2021, as Donald Trump was leaving the White House, boxes of thousands of government records, including what we now know to be hundreds of classified documents, were packed in boxes and taken to Donald Trump's Florida home, Mar-a-Lago. And it became clear to the National Archives and Records Administration that it was missing a variety of documents that it believed it was entitled to have back because they were government records. And that began a months-long negotiation process by the government to obtain the documents. The investigation really takes a very dramatic turn in January of 2022 when the National Archives receives from Mar-a-Lago 15 boxes of records, and when it opens those records, it discovers more than 100 bearing classified markings. At that point, it alerts the Justice Department to the disclosure and discovery of classified records. The Justice Department at that point becomes involved, and months later, it issues a subpoena to the Trump orbit, seeking the return of any and all classified documents that remain in his possession. And this is, again, where the investigation truly escalates, because the Justice Department goes to Mar-a-Lago to collect what it believes to be the entirety of the classified records. It receives roughly 3 dozen. And it obtains information leading investigators to believe that there are yet many more that still remain. In August, specifically August 8th, 2022, the FBI searches Mar-a-Lago armed with a search warrant, and at that point retrieves roughly 100 documents bearing classified markings. And in addition, the assertion, which wound up being false, that all of the documents in Donald Trump's possession had in fact been returned, that wound up not being the case, and the Justice Department came to believe that it might have evidence of potential obstruction, which is in and of itself a crime too. So the mishandling, or what we call the willful retention of national defense information, and obstruction are felonies that carry, years in prison. But this is a federal case, and that infuses it with a degree of gravity that is notable. Although prosecutions of defendants for mishandling classified documents are routine, there is nothing routine about this particular investigation. The politics of it are truly extraordinary and unprecedented. In addition to this being the first federal case against a former president, this is also the first federal case against a leading presidential candidate.
Supporters of Trump have called this investigation politically motivated. Now, in emotionally charged situations like these, special counsels are appointed to look into cases. This happens when the Justice Department perceives itself as possibly having a conflict, or where it's deemed to be in the public interest to have someone outside the government come in and take responsibility for an issue. The man behind the months-long investigation into this classified documents case, that man is Special Counsel Jack Smith. Last year, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland picked Smith, a veteran war crimes prosecutor with a background in public corruption investigations, to lead this one. Classified documents have also been found in the homes of President Joe Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence. Here's what an expert says about the difference with these situations.
This investigation stands apart from other matters concerning current President Joe Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence. In both of those instances, classified documents were recovered from their properties. However, there was no allegation ever made that either man ever intended to conceal the records from the government. Part of what the Justice Department has been alleging for months in sealed court filings and now in this indictment is that there were affirmative steps taken by Donald Trump to prevent the government from retrieving the classified documents and effectively thwarting their efforts to get them back. And that makes this different than the Pence and Biden matters.
Our colleagues at WFAA in Texas also spoke with the college professor about the differences between the cases.
Sure, I think it's support for what it is they're asking for and doing. In the Trump situation, it looks like the National Archives had requested this information repeatedly over a period of months. In addition to that, the possibility may exist that he concealed or tried to hide away some of those documents after being requested to turn them over. In the Biden administration, again, there's a special counsel that's been appointed to look into that, and we don't know exactly what it is they're looking at, what evidence and support they have. But it appears that the president is actually helping with the investigation. Now, I don't believe that the Trump administration could have easily helped out and assisted with the turnover of these documents if he truly believed at the time that he had the ability to take those documents home with him and to his Mar-a-Lago home and keep those. Once he was asked by National Archives to turn them over, he should have turned them over. He didn't do that, and the possibility exists that under this indictment, we're going to see that some things may have been done to falsify documentation and support that he had those documents. And I think that's where the big difference lies in terms of the evidence that they may have. And again, we haven't seen the indictment. We don't know exactly what he's being charged with. A lot of the information in terms of conspiracy, falsification, obstruction, all of these things are coming from the Trump group that says they received the summons to appear on Tuesday. So once that indictment is opened up, unsealed, and revealed, we'll have more information about exactly what it is the government is proffering.
Eric, we hear a lot, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. Whether that remains to be the case here, we'll find out. But it remains to be seen, as you said, that indictment being unsealed. We don't know specifically what the charges are going to be yet, but what potential trouble could Trump be in if he's found guilty?
Well, there's some pretty serious allegations, some serious assertions, of course, under U.S. code, violations of the Espionage Act, the falsification, the retention. 18 U.S.C. 793 is the illegal retention of national defense information. So we don't know exactly what those documents are, but if they had a national defense component to them and they weren't turned over, or they were shown to be held back, there may be some pretty serious charges, ultimately some potential for jail time. It's a very real and serious thing that's been done here and charged and levied, and of course returned back from a federal grand jury. Individuals who've seen the information, the evidence that the government has, and have decided to indict. So very real, and the possibility or potential for a trial may be looming, and one in which the president former president could actually do some jail time.
The Justice Department has said Trump repeatedly resisted efforts by the National Archives and Records Administration to get the documents that are at issue in this case back. A search of his Florida estate turned up 33 boxes. Those boxes contained classified records, including top-secret documents stashed in a storage room. Our colleagues at WWL in New Orleans take a look at what the Presidential Records Act has to say about who owns these kinds of documents and how they have to be handled.
The National Archives and Records Administration is the nation's record keeper. It manages everything from the original U.S. Constitution to military records to a huge online research database about ancestry and U.S. history. It's also in charge of the official record of the president. The Presidential Records Act of 1978, which followed President Richard Nixon's resignation, requires presidents and vice presidents to file away memos, letters, notes, emails, faxes, phone records, texts, and other written communications. A 2019 report by the Congressional Research Service details the process. The administration is by law required to turn the files over to the Archivist of the United States when they leave the White House. The archivist's job is to process and manage those documents. Between 5 and 12 years after a president's term, some classified documents are restricted, but otherwise everything's available to the public. And after 12 years, almost everything is public record unless a president is granted a claim of executive privilege. In January, archivists suspected Trump had violated the Presidential Records Act. Soon after, the Department of Justice recovered 15 boxes of materials from Mar-a-Lago that Trump should have turned over, some containing classified information. In this most recent search of Mar-a-Lago, the FBI was likely searching for more documents Trump didn't turn over. If Trump is found to have violated the Presidential Records Act, he'd be the first former president to do so. And there are penalties he could face for destroying White House records, penalties that Trump himself signed into law as felonies while he was in office.
Now, this is Trump's second indictment this year. In March, he was criminally charged with 34 counts of falsifying records and bribing former adult film star Stormy Daniels with hush money. He He's pleaded not guilty in that case. In May, the former president was found liable of sexual abuse in a civil case brought by columnist E. Jean Carroll. He's also facing a Department of Justice investigation related to his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And the district attorney in Georgia's Fulton County is investigating Trump over alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election in that state. Now, we can't say for certain how much this federal indictment will damage Trump's standing in the 2024 presidential race, or really if it'll damage it at all. It could potentially help the former president. The first indictment generated millions of dollars in contributions to his campaign, and at that time, it didn't hurt him in the polls. Let's go back to WFAA anchors Kara Sewell and Mark Istook now for a look at how these indictments could impact his presidential run.
We know that this does not bar Trump from running for office, and politically he has seen poll bumps after other charges or his liability in the E. Jean Carroll defamation case. Should we expect another bump for him here?
You should absolutely expect that, and you should also expect more tension inside the Republican Party. It has always been the case that former President Trump has been very successful at fundraising when these kinds of efforts, which he perceives as an attack on him, have been carried out. And so as these cases play out, he's going to take advantage of it. Watch this weekend as he's in Georgia, and you're going to see it very clearly that there'll be a strong Republican message about him being sent by his core constituents.
Now, we understand that Governor Ron DeSantis, who is his strongest competitor right now as far as the Republican nomination is concerned, has actually spoken out against the charges. What are you expecting to see, or the indictment rather, what are you expecting to see from other GOP candidates?
Yeah, this is a difficult issue, right? How do you attack the person who is your opponent while also recognize that he is way ahead of you in the public opinion polls? You want to be very careful about harming your party's prestige because that can be damning long term. I think so much of it is going to depend on what plays out as we go through these charges. Remember, there were over 100 documents that were found at the Mar-a-Lago residence. And what's distinguishing about this case is that the federal government asked for him to give the documents back. So much of it depends on the kind of security surveillance video they have. There seems to be an inside witness who has information that may be damning. And certainly shifting the case to Florida is only going to help the president because he's much more popular there than he is in D.C., where he only carried about 5% of the vote in the 2016 or the 2020 elections. So strategically, that looks good for him, but the evidence looks bad.
You kind of alluded to it a moment ago, accusations that this investigation has been politically motivated when you compare it to other cases of missing documents like with Joe Biden or Mike Pence. What do you think that we'll see more inside of this as these charges are made public?
You absolutely will see that. And the distinction here between the Pence and the Biden documents is that the National Archives started in January 2021 trying to get these documents back. And so the raid on Mar-a-Lago, certainly unprecedented and absolutely a concern on a potential presidential opponent, seems to have been facilitated by the fact that they had information that documents had been destroyed. When the National Archives received documents back, they had been ripped up. There have been allegations that President Trump threw documents away. And so it's that kind of information that Jack Smith is really going to have to build in the court of public opinion if he's going to be successful in this case.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Now, this could be good news for Trump. A person familiar with the matter says the case has been assigned to Judge Eileen Cannon. That's a former federal prosecutor who was nominated to the bench by Trump in 2020 and sits in Fort Pierce. Now, why could that be good news for Trump? Well, her rulings last year were in favor of Trump and in opposition to the Justice Department. We will see how that unfolds. This is a developing situation, so please stay with us. We'll break this all down together as we learn more. Thanks for being with me for this edition of In the News Now. I'm Stephanie Haney.